Once, there was a storyteller, and he lived in a small town where everyone had a role, a responsibility, and his responsibility was to entertain. So every day, he would make his way to the center of town and he would share a story, new, old, familiar, and his friends, his family, his community, they gathered and they loved his stories. In fact, they soon began to request some of their favorites. Oh, I'd like to hear the one about strength. Oh, no, I want to hear the one about conquering fear. Oh, what about the one about Taily-Po? Now, they all knew his stories by heart, but none of them ever told them because they belonged to him. As travelers are wont to do, the storyteller began to go on a journey, to share his stories far and wide. He was gone for days, weeks, months, years. At last, he finally returned to a hero's welcome. Everyone took him by the hand and guided him to the center of town and asked him to share a new story. Well, he decided to share an old favorite, so he began. In a time when animals and man... Oh, somebody raised their hand. Actually, Matt tells that story now. Well, this was odd. This was his story, but no matter, he had many more. Okay, let's see, another one. I have it. Once there was a king. Sorry. Nikki tells that story really well. Again, the storyteller was a bit perturbed. This was his story that Nikki was telling, but he knew, the crowd favorite. It begins with a sound. Actually, Benjamin tells that story really, really well. He's so good, so you don't need to tell that one. Do you have something new? The storyteller was livid. He could only think of one thing to do. He ran right to the town wise man, and he told him about the whole thing. These are my stories, the storyteller said. The wise man thought for a moment. Bring me your pillow. And so the storyteller, without a thought, grabbed his finest feather pillow, returned it to the wise man, who lifted it high in the sky, took a knife from his pocket, and slit it open, sending feathers scattering all across the sky in every single direction. Well, or just on top of me. I see. The storyteller was again livid. Why would you do that? You see, the wise man said, your stories are like these feathers. Once you tell them, they travel into the hearts of your listeners, and they no longer belong to you. Well, what can be done about this? That is simple, said the wise man. You can let them go. So, hi everybody, I'm Kyle Joza.
I'm Benjamin Rexroad.
And we are Wandering Aesthetics.
Wandering Aesthetics is a storytelling theater company based here in Akron, Ohio, and you are all now watching live from the living room. Presented by ArtsNow and
sponsored by the Akron Community Foundation and the Knight Foundation.
And so we owe them a great big...
Thank you! I was really early on that.
Yeah, you were really early on that. You missed your cue, Kyle. See, this is why actors need directors. They're constantly missing their cues.
It's true. Sometimes I mess up, but... Oh, you know what? Benjamin. I found my cue.
Oh, prop humor, everybody. Wee, props. Found this in the parking lot. So, well, welcome. As I said, we are storytellers. We're a storytelling theater company. And one of the things that we think about, and sorry, there's like so much tech going on here. One of the things that we think about often is why storytelling? Why is storytelling important? Especially when the world seems chaotic and upsetting, when there's upheaval, why do stories matter? And Kyle, would you like to take it for a second?
Well, so Wandering Aesthetics is a storytelling theater company, and
I'm gonna lean across you, bud.
okay, go for it. And we pride ourselves in really searching and seeking the importance of storytelling and sharing that with our community, the community at large, from youth all the way to adults. And we try and do it in a multitude of ways, whether it be through community events or storytelling programming just like this.
And sometimes the stories are just silly, seemingly just for fun. My favorite type of story is horror. I love scary stories. I love being afraid. And sometimes they're serious stories like the Storyteller's Parable. And sometimes they're true life stories, stories from our lives, stories from the lives of people that we care about. And the reason for this is that narrative is important. Narrative stories are at the heart of everything we do as people. Let's talk for a minute about the greatest story ever told. Religion. That's what people call it, right? The greatest story ever told. And this could be any religion at all, from Christianity to Judaism to Hinduism. At their heart, they all have stories. That's how they communicate their messages. That's how they share their truths. Whether you believe it's actual literal truth or the stories just contain a universal truth, a universal message such as be kind to your neighbor, fight injustice, love one another. They tell through stories that people believe. And because people believe in these stories, we have accomplished some of history's greatest achievements, like Notre Dame, right? That building, it's a cathedral. The pyramids, they were built for pharaohs, and they were designed to be tombs for the afterlife, and contain all the stuff that the pharaohs would need in the afterlife.
Putting a man on the moon.
Man on the moon?
Dreaming it. You had to dream it up to tell the story.
But then also religion is responsible for some bad things too, like wars, the Crusades, which were both good and bad. So history's greatest accomplishments and history's, what's the word I'm looking for? Worst atrocities, because people believe in these stories. Storytelling, narrative. So today we're going to be telling you 7 stories. Well, 8 if you count that first prologue, let's say. Kyle, do you want to talk a little bit about the 7 stories?
So there are a number of different ways that you can actually label or categorize different types of stories. And so we're going to be telling some interactive stories that fit into certain categories.
Or story types.
And we're going to be talking about that. In fact, we decided to use the 7 types, which we're going to be discussing in just a moment.
Right, and there are, so you have what is that, Greek?
Mythology?
Well, Aristotle in Greek
Philosophy.
Poetics. You have 2 types of stories. You have tragedy, you have comedy. With the Arn Thompson folktale classification, you have hundreds of different story types. They are seeking to categorize stories from all over the world according to various themes. So you see how they're connected. As Kyle said, we chose something that was a little simpler, but more than just 2, it's 7. I can't remember the guy's name who categorized it, but he essentially said that every story in the world can fit into 7 categories. And again, this is just one way to look at them. This is not the be-all and end-all. As we know, when you label something, it helps you understand it, helps you wrap your mind around it, but labels are
still limiting.
Right? And so as long as you don't just say, this is solely this label, just like with people, right? Mm-hmm. Solely this label, then they're helpful. They help you understand. They help you comprehend how this story from my culture, my heritage, is similar to a story from your culture or your heritage.
Yeah, it can breed connection. And the beautiful thing that you're going to see tonight, some of these stories, you'll see how they actually fit many of the 7 categories, not just one. They can fit, maybe some of them might even fit all.
Exactly. So, with that said, I think it's time for our first story. Time for me to get out of here and stop talking. Are you ready? Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
Are you ready?
But I'm going to need their help, actually.
Oh, all right. Well, I'll let you explain that. I'm going to leave. Nice work.
Nice work, buddy. So, like I said, I'm going to need your help for this first story. And I know you're at home, and this is virtual, so it's a little different than if you were in person. But this story is called Strength. And when I motion to the camera, like this, I would like you to say with me, strength, strength, that was strength. So let's try that one time all together. So I motion to the camera, and we say, strength, strength, that was strength. Excellent. We are ready for this story. In a time when animals and man walked side by side, the animals decided to hold a contest to determine the true meaning of strength. The contest was Bear's idea, and it was to be held by Crystal Lake. Once all the animals were gathered, Hawk began. Haw! Hawk flew high, high, higher still, until he was no more but a speck in the sky. This was higher than any bird had ever flown before. He circled around and dove back down, 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 and just when it looked like he was about to crash, he landed gracefully. Strength? Was that strength? The animals were impressed. Strength, strength, that was strength. Hawk sat down. Deer was next. He leapt to his feet, or hooves. Deer ran 3 miles into the woods. Deer ran 3 miles back. Deer wasn't even out of breath. Strength? Was that strength? The animals were again impressed. Strength, strength, that was strength. Deer sat down. My personal favorite, Wolf, was next. He got up to his feet and he showed his claws and bared his teeth and he began to dig at the ground. Scrung, scrung, scrung. The dirt was flying in all directions. The animals backed away, covered their eyes. Scrung, scrung, scrung. He did not stop digging until he had dug the deepest hole any of the animals had ever seen. Was that strength? The animals cheered. Strength, strength, that was strength. Wolf sat down. Buffalo was next. Now, right next to Crystal Lake, there was a field of tall grass growing. Buffalo lowered his great horns. Shoo, shoo, shoo. He plowed a road right on through that field. He turned around. Shoo, shoo, shoo. He plowed a road right on back. Strength? Was that strength? The animals cheered. Strength, strength, that was strength. Buffalo sat down. Next up was Bear. There was a group of trees growing nearby. Bear leaned his great shoulder into one. The tree came crashing to the ground. Bear means strength. Was that strength? The animals cheered. Strength! Strength! That was strength.
See, I was the bear.
I guess I was the tree. There was one contestant remaining. He was last. He tried always to be last. In fact, some might say he was a bit lazy. It was Man, and he stretched and yawned and made his way to the center of the animals. And he began to think about what he could do, and then he had an idea. He turned some somersaults. He did a cartwheel. He even did a handstand for a full 10 seconds. And the animals, they were impressed, but they didn't think that was quite strength. So they asked Man if he could do something else. Well, Man was a little agitated. So he ran to the nearest tree and he climbed to the top and began to gather the acorns. And then he threw them at the animals below. How's this for strength? Yeah, huh? Well, the animals weren't so impressed. All he had done was climb up a tree and throw some nuts to the ground, so yeah. They asked if he could do anything else. And now, Man was enraged. He climbed down the tree, looked the animals right in their eyes. Strength? You want to see strength? He ran to the edge of the forest. He grabbed his bow. He grabbed his arrow. He notched an arrow, pulled back the bow, aimed it right at Buffalo. How's this for strength? Buffalo fell over. Dead. Dead. The animals fled. And Man, he was cheering. Dropped him down. Now that is what I call real strength. Deep in the woods, the animals gathered. Deer spoke. Strength? Was that strength? Bear answered. No, that was death. That was death. Ever since that day, whenever Man enters the woods, we must walk alone. Because the animals, they still remember Man. That creature, Man. The one who confuses killing with strength.
Wow, what a powerful story. Especially considering what's going on lately. So I wanted to, that falls into the, what did we say, label, category of tragedy. That was our tragic story. And so I just wanted to share this, so throughout the evening too, I'll be popping in to share some quotes, some thoughts with you. This one comes from one of my favorite theater directors of all time, Anne Bogart. She has these books, And Then You Act, and What's the Story? And in What's the Story? This is her quote. "The times are shifting. We are on the cusp of a new paradigm, as yet unnamed, only partially inhabited, unfamiliar, and novel. The pecking order of top-down organizational structures and hierarchical control are losing strength. Our understanding of action and responsibility is changing. In moments such as these, of upheaval and change, stories become necessary to frame our experiences. It is the role of the artist to write new fictions. Those who can formulate the stories that make the world understandable will redefine the experiences of those who live in it. So anytime that there's upheaval or I start to get kind of frantic about what's the role of the artist, are we doing enough with storytellers, is it good enough, we're just telling some silly stories sometimes, I always come back to Anne, and especially that quote, that it is the stories who help make the world understandable. Those who write those stories will be the ones who frame it for everyone, who help make the world understandable to everyone else. Yeah. You have anything you'd like to add?
I'm just ready to keep working and to redefine whatever's next together with all of our fellow artists and our fellow arts users and our community as a whole.
So, that being said, let's move on to the next category, which is the exact opposite end of the spectrum. We're going to move to comedy now.
That's right. Let's get this a little lighthearted here.
All right.
Okay, so this is a really, really fun story. It's called The King and His Two Sons. Once there was a great king, and he had, I bet you can guess it, 2 sons. One was overly pessimistic. Even on the brightest day, with a crystal clear blue sky, he would spot the lone cloud floating by. The other was an optimist of the worst kind. You know, the glass is half full kind of guy. But it went even worse. When the glass was empty, our optimist would say, "It's never empty, it's full of air." Well, as they grew older, this only grew worse and worse. And our king, as any father would, was concerned about the growing dichotomy and disparity between his 2 sons. He was afraid that the pessimist son would never see a glimmer of hope in his life, and that his optimist son would get into the real world and be incredibly discouraged. So, he thought and thought and thought about how he could help the pessimist have a glimmer of hope and that optimist come down a little bit. And one day it came to him. He would get them both a brilliant gift designed specifically for each son. And he knew just the gift. In one room, for the pessimist, he bought a horse, a beautiful black stallion. He knew that once his son saw that horse, he would be all smiles, and at last he would find some joy in his life. In the other room, for the optimist, he had it filled to the brim with manure. This, he thought, would be a gentle way to teach his son that not everything is so pleasant. And so he woke the boys up and took them to their separate rooms and said, "In each room you will find a gift. I will be back in an hour to see what you have learned from this present." So each boy went into their room, and the time ticked, ticked, ticked by. And at last, the father opened the door to the room with the pessimist. And unfortunately, he found the pessimist in the corner, crouched over, upset. The horse was just walking around the room. "Why, son, what's the matter?" the king asked. "Well, why did you give me a horse?" the pessimist said. "I'm going to have to feed it and brush it and clean up after it, and then one day it's just going to die." Well, that didn't go as well as the king had hoped, but maybe the optimist, his other son, would have learned a lesson. So he opened the other door, and he couldn't believe what he saw. The horse poop was flying all over and his son was nowhere to be found. Son, are you okay? And at last his son popped up right in the middle of the manure. Dad, look at all this manure. Son, what are you doing? Well, I'm climbing through. With all this manure, I'm looking for the pony. The story of the king and his two sons.
I definitely think you, Kyle, would be the son who is climbing through the room of manure looking for the pony. And I'd be the other one, right?
Yes, definitely.
So that was comedy, obviously, but even though it's just it's a funny story, right? It still has a message. It still has a meaning and a purpose behind it. You know, maybe the meaning is that even in a room full of poop, there's a pony somewhere.
There's a pony. Gotta be a pony in here.
So the quote that I wanted to share this time is, it's again from Bogart. They're all from Anne's book. And I just think it's short and sweet, and then we'll move on to the next topic. So rather than mechanically allowing other people's stories to guide our lives, it is possible to get involved and narrate your story from a state of passionate participation. Are you the pessimist who's upset about getting a horse, which I would actually really love? Can I get a pony?
No, we already have like 21 pets. We don't need any more.
Or do you want to get passionately involved and be the optimist and telling the stories for the good? Are you the person who looks through the stories for the positive? All right, so I think it's time for our next category, our next topic, which is rags to riches. Rags to riches. You got a good story for this?
I have a very fun story for this one.
All right.
I'm going to need your help at home again. So this story is about an old man and older woman. We're going to find out about them in just a minute. But one of the things that they do is they don't have a normal kitchen sink. They don't have a disposal. So they actually dump their slops over a wall. And so during this story, I'm actually going to do this motion. And when I do that, I would love if you at home could join me in saying, slosh, and you can play with it. You can just go slosh, or you can go slush, or whatever you want to do, but have fun with it. And you'll always know when the bucket motion is coming because I'll count to 6 beforehand. Let me get a drink and we'll start the story. Once there was an old man and an even older woman, and they lived in a small cottage surrounded by a nice stone wall. And every day the older woman would peel the potatoes, and she would throw the peelings into the slop bucket. Then she would peel the onions, and she would throw the peelings into the slop bucket. Then she would peel the carrots and throw the peelings, you guessed it, into the slop bucket. After dinner, she would wash up her dishes and put all the dirty dishwater into the slop bucket. Now, the old man had, if you were to believe him, the harder part of the job. He had to pick up that heavy slop bucket, carry it across the floor, out the door, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to the back garden wall, where he would slosh, throw those drippings over the garden wall. Well, one day when he slosh, he heard, "Oh, I wish you would not do that to me."
Slosh, 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 slosh.
Well, the old man was a bit taken aback and maybe a bit wet, and he looked all around, but he couldn't for the life of him find where that little voice was coming from. So he went back inside and he told his wife about all he'd heard. And she said, "Could it be one of the wee folk?" "Well, I don't know who it is," the old man said, "but whoever it is, they certainly do not want us to throw our slops over the back garden wall." Well, the next day, the older woman peeled the potatoes and threw the peelings into the slop bucket, peeled the onions and put the peelings into the slop bucket, peeled the carrots and put the peelings into the slop bucket. After dinner, she washed on up and threw that dirty dishwater into the slop bucket. And the old man, he picked up that bucket, carried it across the floor, out the door. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps to the back garden wall where he slosh.
I really wish you would not do that. Every day you do that.
Well, again, the man didn't know where the voice was coming from. So he looked all around, and this time he looked up and even to the ground. And there, right by his feet, was a tiny little man in a tiny little hat with a tiny little red feather sticking out of it.
I wish you would stop doing that,
The little man said.
This? Slosh, 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 slosh.
"I'm sorry, but I do not know what you are talking about."
Or maybe this.
Every day...
No.
No. Every day you do things like that. Every day you put your slop bucket over the garden wall onto my cottage. Onto your cottage? The old man said, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, look. So the old man peered over that garden wall, but all he saw were rocks and weeds. So he went back inside and he told his wife all he'd seen and all he'd heard, which wasn't that much. "I just don't know what to do," the old man said. "I didn't see anything over that wall." So the next day, the older woman peeled the potatoes, threw those peelings into the slop bucket, peeled the onions, peelings into the slop bucket, peeled the carrots, peelings into the slop bucket, and the dirty dishwater went there too. And the old man picked it up. He carried it across the floor, out the door. 1, 2, it was raining that day. 3, 4, 5, 6, and slosh.
Really? Are you kidding me? I have asked you time and time again not to do that. Please stop doing that.
There was the little wee person at the old man's feet. "Listen, I don't know what you're talking about. I looked over the wall and all I saw were weeds and grass."
Well, I wish you could see with my eyes.
"If you could see through my eyes, would you be willing to?" said the wee man. "Well, I guess," said the old man.
Then put your foot on top of mine.
Well, this sounded preposterous. He was a little tiny man. But when he looked down, the little tiny man's foot was big indeed. So the old man placed his foot on top of the little man's foot and peered over that garden wall. And he was amazed at what he saw. An entire little village, little stone cottages, little stone roads, and a whole bunch of people. And the place where he always threw the slop bucket? Well, there were potato peelings dripping down the window, onion skins in the yard, carrot peelings in the chimney, and worst of all, the house was flooded by dirty dishwater. "I have been pouring my slops down your chimney."
That is what I've been trying to tell you, said the little man. I wish you would stop.
So the old man went back in and he told his wife everything he'd seen, everything he'd heard, which this time was a lot. They got to talking. I wish there was some other way. I can't imagine carrying the bucket all the way around to the front yard, though. It's just so heavy. Well, said his wife, what if we had a front door built along with our back door? Well, they'd never thought of that before. So the carpenter was called at once. He got to work. His work went fast and smooth, and he built a fine new door. And that night, the wife made dinner. First, she peeled the potatoes, and the skins went into the slop bucket. Then she peeled the onions, and the skins went in the slop bucket. Then she peeled the carrots, and those skins, too, went in the slop bucket. After dinner, she washed up all the dishes and put the dirty dishwater into that slop bucket. And the old man, he picked up the bucket, carried it across the floor, out the new door. It's only 4 steps this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, and slosh. And silence. And even though the old man and the older woman had spent every dime they had left on that new door, they never wanted for anything ever again. Because every time they opened it, clink, 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 a tiny little silver coin would roll in. It was a gift from one neighbor to another. This is kind of one-sided. I'm very wet over here.
I can get the other side if you want. Sorry, Nikki, because I'm watching the feed over there. Nikki said this must be my favorite story, and I think she's right. I think that is my favorite story. But for many reasons, one of which is I love the message that they spent everything, right? It was their whole life savings, but they did it to take care of a neighbor, and they did it without expectation. They just did it so that they were good neighbors. And yeah, they got rewarded in the end, and that's nice, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that can be an important part of it, but sometimes it's nice just to do things to take care of other people. So, I have another quote that I want to share. Again, this is from Anne Bogart, but this is actually from her book, And Then You Act. It is a good book. So, a South African writer described a meeting a nomadic poet in Senegal who talked about the role of poets in his society. The job of the poet, he explained to her, is to remember where the water holes are. The survival of the whole group depends on a few water holes scattered around the desert. When his people forget where the water is, the poet can lead them to it. And Anne says, what an apt metaphor for the role of the artist in any culture, in any society. The water is the history, the memory, the juice, and the shared experiences, the stories of the shared experiences. Yeah, I love that image that, you know, the artists, the poets are the keepers of the stories, the people who can help us remember who we are and where we're going and where we need to get to. I think that that's wonderful. And just like that, I hope that I can be the type of neighbor who will do that, who will spend my life savings to help out another neighbor. That's one of the reasons that I love that story. So, actually, now we're going to do a song. And since I don't sing, I'm going to leave you to it. You got this?
I mean, you can sing.
Okay. Not with a mic.
And he's gone. So, yeah, because we promised some songs. So we're going to do some songs. And this one, this one's always fun to sing, so we'd love if you would sing along at home too. We're gonna sing "This Land Is Your Land," and so what I think we'll do is we will sing the first verse, and then I'll sing, since probably not as many people know the second, I'll sing the second verse, and then we can go back to the first verse and sing it one more time. All right, everybody ready at home? Everybody virtually ready to sing? Here we go. We're gonna spread it across Akron and beyond. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I was walking the ribbon of highway, I saw above me the endless skyway. I saw below me the golden valley. This land was made for you and me. Back to the first verse. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the Redwood Island, to the Gulf Stream waters, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land is made for you and me. I really like the Redwood Forest, so I just keep thinking about it in my head. I want to go back there, clearly. All right, so we've got a couple more songs later on, but we're going to go ahead and transition to the next category, which is one of our favorites at Wandering Aesthetics, overcoming the monster. And I love it too because you can think of it as overcoming the monster externally or internally. Is it a dragon? Is it fear? I don't know. We're going to find out. This story is called Wait Until Emmett Comes. It was a dark and stormy night. The traveler, weary from the road, was seeking refuge from the storm. His path opened up, and at last he found what looked like an abandoned cabin. Muddy Mississippi at his back, everything he had been through that night. What was a little breaking and entering? The door opened with a The place was a wreck. Chairs overturned, dishes broken, gouge marks, scratches along the walls. He righted one of the chairs and drug it over towards the fireplace with a scratch. As he sat down, the winds picked up, the thunder cracked, the lightning struck. Noah himself would have been terrified. He set about making a fire, using only some small twigs and a lone match. Soon, the flames were casting shadows along the walls. And it was from these shadows that a smooth, silky black cat, the size of a Saint Bernard, emerged. It jumped right into the flames and began to bat at a coal, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The traveler could feel his pulse racing. He rubbed his eyes, he counted to 10. Make it go away, make it go away. But the creature made its way out of the fire and nestled itself right next to the traveler's leg. Wait until Emmett comes. His song was interrupted by another creature. Another cat, larger than the first, the size of a lion, jet black. It strolled over into the flames and began to snap at the popping embers. Eventually it tired of this game, leaping out and resting right next to the traveler's other leg. It looked to the first cat. "Growl. What should we do with him?"
Growl. We should do nothing. We should wait until Emmett comes.
Heart racing. Pulse racing. Heart attack. Heart attack. Go to sleepy, go to sleepy, go to sleepy little baby. When you wake up, you make yourself a cake, cornbread crumbled in gravy. The noise came from behind him. The traveler could feel a tingle run up his spine. The little hairs on the back of his neck prickled. At last, a large creature leapt over his head directly into the flames. It began to eat the coals, extinguishing the flame slowly. At last, as the fire burned away, the creature looked at the other two cats. "What should we do with him?" The two other cats answered in unison, "We should do nothing. We should wait until Emmett comes." At last, the flames completely died out. The man was terrified, but he found just enough courage to rise to his feet and tell those creatures, "Well, good night, cats. It's been a pleasant evening, and whenever Emmett gets here, you tell him that I was here, but now I'm gone." Overcoming the monster.
I mean, did he really overcome the monster, though?
Or just run away?
So even in that, right, that's the category that we are talking about, overcoming the monster. But even that, this story, it didn't 100% fit into that category because he didn't overcome. He just ran out of there. He didn't even wait for the monster to get there, right? So that's, I love that story. And there's so many variations of it. And Nikki had mentioned that she loved when we sort of play with the stories. And that's one of the cool things that we do with our stories and that you'll see in stories is that there's ways to combine them, overlap them, take pieces and parts and make something new out of it. Because we haven't really told that story since 2015.
Yeah, 2014 even.
But you took a lot of from Talipo and pulled into that one. So I love that. So another quote from Anne. In telling a story, I funnel my observations and feelings through a particular lens. The result is the distillation of experience into a communicative form, into expression. Without the process of compression and distillation, there is no expression, only description. And expression communicates more effectively than description. Stories are an efficient way of sharing hard-earned experiences, feelings, insights, and lessons. Yeah, so now that we've done overcoming the monster, so we've done tragedy, comedy, rags to riches, overcoming the monster. We have 3 more types of stories left, and this one is called Conquering Fear, and it's about a quest, right?
Mm-hmm. Which we're all really familiar with quests. Many stories follow that. A lot of the bigger stories, thinking Harry Potter and Star Wars, they follow that idea of the quest.
So in our monster story, he ran away from fear, In this one, we're gonna hear about someone who overcame it.
And I'm gonna need your help again. So,
All right, I'm gonna go.
okay, you can help too, though. You know, they don't have to do it by themselves. So, this story, it's very similar. I'm gonna have you chant with me. So instead of just being a chant, though, this is actually a mantra, and I really love this mantra. It's one that we should all be able to use in everyday life, and it's very simple. It's just no fear, no fear, no fear. So same thing, I will reference the camera, and when I do, we can say together, no fear, no fear, no fear. So one more time. No fear, no fear, no fear. And this story follows a young man called Miyobi. Not named Miyobi, called Miyobi. You see, his name, well, no one really knows, but he was nicknamed Miyobi, which in his language means fearful one, because Miyobi was afraid of everything. Even the slightest squeak would send him reeling. Well, as he grew up, and his mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles all kept calling him Miyobi, eventually it became so annoying to him that he decided he had to overcome his fears. So one night, he set out to do just that. He grabbed a pack and put in all of the essentials: a flashlight, a water bottle, and of course, some more supplies, just in case. And he threw the pack on his back, and off he went. The first step was to enter the dark forest. Now, who would name a forest the dark forest? That just seems illogical. But he had never been in the dark forest by himself. And of course, our story begins at midnight. So, as soon as he stepped foot in the woods, he could hear the crackling of the branches and the of the wind above and the hoo of the owls. And he wanted to run home, run into bed, throw the covers over his head. But he remembered his mantra: no fear, no fear, no fear. And so he pressed on. He walked and walked and walked, and at last the dense forest began to thin and eventually became an open field. He had conquered a fear. And above him, he saw a sky full of beautiful stars. What a perfect place to rest, he thought. So he put his pack down and he laid his head, and he had just fallen asleep when he heard, he bolted awake at the edge of the forest. Right near the hills, he could see a pack of wolves. They seemed to be heading in his direction. So he shot up and he wanted to run home, jump in bed, throw the covers over his head. But he remembered his mantra: no fear, no fear, no fear. And so he kept walking towards the rising sun. Eventually, he found a narrow path, and he followed it until it came to a seemingly abandoned town. Now, he had never been in a village other than his own, so he was a bit nervous, especially seeing windows boarded up and seemingly empty streets. But then he noticed in the town square there was a group of hubbubbing men, and as he got near, he could just make out what they were saying. Excuse me? Miyobi said.
What do you want, boy?
Asked one of the men. My name is Miyobi, and I have come to conquer my fear.
You cannot conquer your fear in a land where there is no hope.
No hope? Miyobi asked. I don't understand. Look to the mountains, boy, another one said. At the edge of the village, there was a series of majestic mountains. They were silhouetted perfectly against the blue sky. Well, they're beautiful, Miyobi said. Do you not see the creature that terrorizes our village? Miyobi shook his head. No. Look closer, boy. It has the head of a lion, the wings of a dragon, the talons of an eagle. It breathes fire, and it will terrorize you just as it has terrorized us. Well, as the creature was described, it became clearer and clearer and clearer to Miyobi. He wanted to run home, jump in bed, throw the covers over his head. But he remembered his mantra. No fear, no fear, no fear. And so he began to walk towards the mountain. Boy, what do you think you're doing? I'm going to conquer this monster. Well, at last he reached the foot of the mountain, and he began to climb slowly but surely from boulder to boulder to boulder. And something strange was happening as he did. The creature seemed to be growing smaller, smaller, and smaller. A trick of the eyes, Miyobi thought. It will surely grow big once I arrive at the peak. And when he did, the creature was nowhere to be found. Oh no, Miyobi thought. I have been tricked. I have been fooled. It must be right behind me. But again, the creature was nowhere to be found. He was just about to head down the mountain when he noticed on the top cairn of the peak, and a cairn is a little pile of rocks, there was a small, shadowy, little toad-like creature. Miyobi went over and he grabbed the creature and he carried it down, down, down the mountain, through the village, back to the hubbubbing men. Excuse me, said Miyobi, but I have brought you your monster, and its name is Fear. And then, with a, the creature was gone.
Did I turn it? Good, it's on. Okay. Again, going back to the fact that there are stories that share similar DNA, that's one of the reasons that we find categories for them. There's a story that we heard that I believe is either Russian or Ukrainian, or somewhere in that general area of the world, where it's a village and there is a giant who's harassing the village. Everyone's afraid to go outside. The village is running low on supplies. The giant is eating all their crops and animals. And finally, a small child goes out, and much like that, every step he takes, it grows smaller and smaller, to the point where he's able to pick it up, and once he does, poof, like that, it disappears. And that's actually where my tattoo here comes from. There's a giant at the gate. And so it's from a totally different part of the world, but has such similarities. Like, they're so similar. And actually, the next story that you're going to hear has a similar connection to a story that you're all quite familiar with.
Yeah, see if you can figure it out.
But before we go into that, you do have a song, and I'm
That's
going
right.
to share a quote, and then you can go from the song into the
Story, got it.
story. All right. Human beings like stories. Our brains have a natural affinity not only for enjoying narratives and learning from them, but also for creating them. In the same way that your mind sees an abstract pattern and makes it into a face, your imagination sees a pattern of events and makes it into a story. Researchers have found that the human brain has a natural affinity for narrative construction. People tend to remember facts more accurately if they encounter them in the context of a story rather than a list.
Just think back to history class. You can remember the names a lot better if you know the story.
Yeah, and I don't know the dates at all, but I know the stories, right? I can't tell you when they happened, but I know what happened. All right.
All right, so we're going to sing a song that we've actually used for a couple of different performances. It's a very, very popular, famous song, especially in the Union days, but it's called Which Side Are You On? And for this song, I'm going to sing all the verses, but I want you to join me for the chorus. And the chorus is really simple. It sounds like this. Which side are you on? 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 And that's it. So let's start with that, and then I'll go into the first chorus. 1, 2, ready, go. Which side are you on? 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 They say in Harlan County there are no neutrals there. You'll either be a Union man or you'll work for J.H. Blair. Which side are you on? 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 My daddy was a miner and I'm a miner's son. He'll be with fellow workers until this battle's won. Which side are you on? 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 Oh, workers, can you stand it? Oh, tell me how you can. Will you be a lousy scab or will you be a man? Which side are you on? 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 Come on, all you good workers, good news to you all tell of how the good old Union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? Last one. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Give yourself a round of applause. That was beautiful. And obviously it's a little sexist because we know that women are just as powerful, if not more so, than men. But it was written a while ago. Anyways, let's talk about the voyage and the return. We're going to tell a story about a character you might be very, very familiar with. This character's name is Sinbad, and he went on many voyages, in fact 7, I do believe, but we're going to tell part of his 3rd voyage. Of course, it begins with him in Baghdad, counting his money, but wishing he had more, dreaming of the seas. So, of course, where did he go? But on another voyage, of course. He joined a merchant ship, and they went for months from port to port selling their goods. Eventually, though, their time came to a close, and it was time for them to head home. But as happens in most voyages, it wasn't easy going. In fact, as they were heading on the path, the waters picked up and began to toss and turn their ship. The waves were crashing. The waves were crashing over the crew and Sinbad, drenching them in seawater, and at last the water crashed the boat itself on the shore of a distant island. The island seemed deserted, and the boat was quite damaged quite badly. But the crew and Sinbad knew they could fix it if they could just go in and find some resources. So they headed inland, and they started to see slow signs of life. It seemed like there were places where there had been some kind of creature. They gathered fruit and they kept going inland, looking to see if maybe they could find human life. At last, they came to a giant cave that seemed to have a twinkling light inside. They snuck inside, and at the very end, they could see a fire. They made their way towards the fire. And that's when they noticed something very peculiar indeed. There was a large table, 10 feet tall, and on it, gold, 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 rubies, jewels galore. Oh, this was what they had truly been looking for. So Sinbad ordered some of the men up to the table. They climbed up and began gathering jewels, and they were just about finished when they heard a stomping. The light at the end of the cave was suddenly gone, and they could just see the silhouette of what looked like a giant man. The creature entered the cave, and all of the crew scattered in every direction, but there was nowhere to hide. At last, the creature, a cyclops, looked at all of the men and shouted, "What are you doing in my cave?" Sinbad, the bravest of all the men, came forward. "We were just looking for resources, sir. We're trying to get some food, some supplies, and head back into the seas. If you don't mind, we'll just be going now." Well, that creature did mind. He picked Sinbad up by the leg and tossed him to the side. "I will eat you all in the morning. Right now I need some rest." And so the Cyclops laid down and fell asleep. The men were too terrified to move. They were cowed, shaking back and forth. At last, Sinbad, who was badly bruised, stood up. "Men, we must go fix the ship." "But if we leave, he will eat us. He will surely eat us. And if he sees us at the ship, he will surely destroy it." "I have a plan," Sinbad said. "Now listen, you, and you, gather all the gold and jewels you can. The rest of you come with me." Slowly and quietly, they tiptoed out of the cave. They snuck down to the shore, where they repaired the ship as best as they could. Just as the sun was beginning to rise, the men who had fixed the ship encouraged Sinbad to get on. "Quick, quick, let's go. We can leave now, and the giant will never know." "You would leave your men?" Sinbad said. "No, I will not. I will return." He took an oar from the ship and grabbed his knife and began to sharpen one edge of it. He made his way all the way back to the cave. The Cyclops was still sleeping. He gathered the men who had the jewels and gold, and he lit that oar on fire. At last, he counted to 3. And they screamed at the Cyclops, who woke, and he tried to shake the crud out of his one eye. And as he was doing it, well, Sinbad took that oar, the flaming oar, and lifted it right near the eye of the Cyclops, who was momentarily blinded. And then he dropped it and said, "Run, men, run!" And so they ran as fast as they could to the boat, and they got it out into the seas. But that Cyclops, he let out a terrible cry, and he ran to the edge of the forest, and he grabbed boulders, and he began chucking them in the sea. They narrowly missed the ship, but the ship was tossing and turning, and the men prayed and prayed and prayed until at last they were finally able to outrun the Cyclops, who let out one more terrible "Ooh!" Finally, the peace of the sea overcame them, and they counted their gold and their rubies and their jewels galore, because this would make them quite rich once they reached their home shore.
So, Kyle, what story does that remind you of?
I believe it reminds me of the Odyssey.
Right, and there are, just like in the Odyssey, there are other voyages that Sinbad goes on and encounters other creatures, monsters, myths, legends, and so, you know, it's that crazy way again that stories can go from one place to the next and transform and evolve over time as well. And if we're talking about the power of stories, If you don't know, that comes from 1001 Arabian Nights, which is about a king who ends up getting married to woman after woman and killing her each night. And the final woman, Scheherazade, gets him, she starts telling him stories each night and not finishing them. And that's what ends up saving her life and making her the permanent queen. So even in that story, it's a frame story for all these other smaller stories, but it ends up saving her life. What a powerful message. Storytelling saves lives. Speaking of which, our last quote for the evening, because we're coming to our last story. So again, to go over them, we have tragedy, right? The categories: tragedy, comedy, rags to riches, overcoming the monster, the quest, voyage and return. The last one I'll tell you now is rebirth, and we'll come back to that in just a second, but it is our last quote for the night. Stories give order and meaning to existence and are less costly than direct experience, because with stories it is possible to collect information without personally having to undergo the experience. The most significant human exchanges occur through narrative. Even a well-told bedtime story can permanently alter the synaptic pathways of the listeners. A well-told bedtime story can change your brain. So that being said, we're moving into the final story, Rebirth. And what is this one called, Kyle?
The Armadillo's Song.
And so even though I don't sing, I have a part to play in this, right? And I get to play some music. And I'm really excited.
All right, we'll go get ready.
Okay.
Once, there was an armadillo. He lived a happy, cozy life in his little burrow next to a large pond with glorious trees on either side and a road in the distance. He loved his life. His favorite thing to do was to listen to all the sounds of nature, because you see, more than anything else, the armadillo loved music. And boy, did he want to learn to sing. That was his one wish in life, that he could sing. In fact, every single day, he would leave his burrow and he would rest by the pond and he would listen to the frogs croak out their song. No, frogs, not you yet.
But you said song.
I did, but frog song. More like, ribbit, ribbit, Jeremiah was a bullfrog. I don't know if that's what their song sounds like. It'd be kind of weird to sing about themselves, but who knows? Well, one day, the armadillo worked up enough courage to tell those froggies, I just want to say that I think you sing beautifully. Ribbit, thank you, they all said with a bow. And I was wondering if you would be so kind as to teach me to sing like you. The frog's eyes went wide, and they began to ribbit with laughter. Who's ever heard of an armadillo that can sing? And off they hopped. Well, this was disappointing. The armadillo had been listening to those frogs day after day for years. He had not expected to be shut down so quickly, but alas, he made his way back into his burrow and he resigned himself to just stay inside for a while. But as fate would have it, a family of well-meaning crickets moved in at the base of the tree right next to his burrow. And every single night, they would sing a beautiful song.
Oh,
no, Benji, crickets.
Yeah.
So we're doing the cricket song. You're not a cricket.
Okay. This is why I said that I wanted to rehearse, and you said, no, we can just do it.
We just improv. We'll just go with it. Improvise. All right. Well, we're 0 for 2, but room for improvement. And he listened to those crickets night after night until finally he worked up the courage to leave his burrow and look down at those crickets and say, "Crickets, I just want to say that first of all, you're great neighbors and I love your song." And the little crickets, they looked up, kind of far up because, you know, they're crickets. And they said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," in unison, and they took a little bow. "I was wondering," the armadillo said, "if you would be so kind as to teach me to sing like you." Well, the cricket's eyes went wide, and they began to chirp in laughter.
Who has ever heard of an armadillo that can sing?
They said, and hopped away to find a new home. Well, now, not only was the armadillo discouraged, he was depressed. He made his way back into his burrow and was determined more than ever to stop listening to music and to stop every time wanting to learn to sing. No more, he thought. But again, fate has a way. And one day along that road, at the edge of the forest near the pond, there was a traveler, and this traveler had with him a cage full of canaries. And wouldn't you know that they just sang the most beautiful song that our armadillo had ever... I didn't even finish saying it, and we are on the birds. The birds.
Yeah, the rule of 3, though, right? In storytelling, everything happens 3 times, and the 3rd time is when things change.
All right, well, this is not following that rule. Just like Armadillo, Benjamin too will have his day. Well, Armadillo was so moved by their song that he left his burrow and he traveled along behind the traveler. And that traveler, he walked for miles and miles with that cage full of canaries. And the armadillo was tired. But finally, the traveler stopped and put the cage down. And the armadillo went up and he said, "Canaries, I just want to..." Hold on. Okay, I'm good. I just want to say that is the most beautiful song I've ever heard.
Tweet, tweet, tweet. Why, thank you, good sir.
Well, I was just wondering, would you be so kind as to teach me to sing like you? And the birds' eyes went wide, and their beaks fell open, and they began to tweet with laughter. Tweet, 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 tweet.
Who's ever heard of an armadillo that can sing?
Well, the armadillo laid down right there in the middle of the road, determined to become nothing more than a speed bump. This was not what he had planned. Eventually, the traveler left with the cage full of canaries. And our armadillo, he just slept in the middle of the road, hoping his end was near. But again, fate has a way. And it just so happened that where he was resting was only a few meters away from a house. And that night, as the stars came out and the moon began to rise, he heard the sound of a guitar. The strumming was beautiful. It was absolutely the most beautiful thing he had ever heard in his life. So even though he had been determined to become a speed bump, our armadillo, he worked his way over to that house and he knocked on the door. And at last, it opened. There was an armadillo at the musician's door. He was quite surprised. Even more so when the armadillo spoke. "Sir, I just want to say that was the most beautiful song I have ever heard. And I was just wondering, you're my last hope. Can you please teach me how to sing?" Well, the musician's eyes did go wide, but he didn't laugh. Instead, he invited the armadillo in, and they talked all night long. As the sun began to rise, Armadillo asked once again, "We've had a wonderful conversation, but back to my original question, sir, do you think you could teach me to sing?" "I could," the musician said, "but it would take sacrifice. It would take more than you're willing to give right now." "Oh, I'm willing to give anything. Please, please." "Listen, I'll make you a deal," said the musician. "You go home. You live out the rest of your life. You listen to music every day and you fall in love deeper and deeper. And when your life is coming to an end, you come back to my house and I will teach you how to sing." And so the armadillo made his way back to his burrow and he lived a glorious long life. But when it was coming to the end, he went back to the musician's house and the musician fulfilled his promise. A few weeks later, right near the armadillo's burrow, the frogs, the crickets, and some loose birds were resting near the water when a musician came and sat down under the shade of a big birch tree. He took out an instrument and began to play it. The frogs, the crickets, the canaries, their eyes went wide. This was the most beautiful, the most powerful song they had ever seen, ever heard in their lives. They looked to see who or what was making it. They couldn't believe it. It was Armadillo. Benjamin, that's your cue.
Much like the armadillo, my life is full of disappointment and sadness, and I give up.
Okay, but just like the armadillo, even though he wanted to give up on numerous occasions, he kept coming back again and again and again. Persistence. Persistence is key, my friend. And so now it's time.
I don't have the hard shell of an armadillo, so you've hurt me. You've wounded me.
Well, I apologize, but I think the audience would really appreciate hearing your armadillo song.
Okay, all right. All right. You ready?
Ready.
All right. Nice and tuned. You ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you.
Yay! I think the armadillo song was a little more full, more of a full song, not just a chord, and maybe not so sort of melancholy, filled with melancholy. So, anyways, that was our story about rebirth, because the armadillo was reborn and did become the most beautiful singer in the entire world. And we all have that power, not to be an armadillo or to be the most beautiful singer in the world, but to change ourselves, whether it's changing our neural pathways from listening to stories or by joining with our community to sing songs and really make a difference. So right now, we can do one of those things. We can sing a song together to end this performance. Now, most of you know we do performances, a lot of stories, a lot of spooky stories especially, but we also do youth performances. And the last one we did in February, which feels like 500 years ago, was a performance called the Velveteen Rabbit. And the students actually were the actor creators, so they devised it themselves. And we actually included a few folk songs. And one of those songs is called Buck-Eyed Rabbit. And it was stuck in all of our students' heads and all of our adults' heads who were working on the project, and probably is still in there, back there somewhere, just gnawing away. So I thought we could sing that together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sing through the full song because it's very simple, and then I will teach you the verse and the chorus. but it sounds like this. I wanted sugar very much, I went to Sugar Town. I climbed up in that sugar tree and I shook that sugar down. Buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo. Buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo. And that's it. So the verse is, I wanted sugar very much, I went to Sugar Town. I climbed up in that sugar tree and I shook that sugar down. So let's try that. We'll sing it twice through. I wanted sugar very much, I went to Sugar Town. I climbed up in that sugar tree and I shook that sugar down. Again, I wanted sugar very much, I went to Sugar Town. I climbed up in that sugar tree and I shook that sugar down. Now the chorus, and it's buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo. So let's sing that through twice. Buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo. Again, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo. All right, so let's sing the whole thing, verse, chorus. Let's do it 3 times. Verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus. All right, I wanted sugar very much. 1, 2, ready, go. I wanted sugar very much, I went to Sugar Town. I climbed up in that sugar tree and I shook that sugar down. Buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo. I wanted sugar very much, I went to Sugar Town. I climbed up in that sugar tree and I shook that sugar down. Buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo. I wanted sugar very much, I went to Sugar Town. I climbed up in that sugar tree and I shook that sugar down. Buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo. Last part. Buck-eyed rabbit, shoo shoo, buck-eyed rabbit, shoo.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for watching, and thank you to ArtsNow for hosting us, and thank you to the Akron Community Foundation and the Knight Foundation for sponsoring us. And I realized that my mic was off because I don't sing with it on. So let me say that one more time. We want to, it's on now. We want to say thank you to ArtsNow for hosting us. And thank you to Akron Community Foundation and Knight Foundation for sponsoring Live from the Living Room.
Yeah, and there's a back catalog that you can go check out now. I know there have been at least 3 that have been done so far, so check them all out. This should be the 4th one, and I know there's more to come in the future. And also, for the mics we're using, thank you. Shout out to Katie Beck, Nima Tamong of Gum Dip Theater. Thank you so much for letting us borrow your mics.
Yes, thank you.
But just like in the Buck-eyed Rabbit song, I think it's time that we shoo shoo as well. So thank you so much again. We have been Wandering Aesthetics, and we ask that you keep wandering. Night, everybody.